So today we're going to be talking about roundabouts. I know Kevin talked about him running into a roundabout, and really it is something that you don't come across often, but when you do, it can get really confusing. If you've never encountered a roundabout or actually have no idea what I'm talking about, a roundabout is a traffic circle. So it's typically a circular intersection where road traffic is permitted to flow in one way in a circular pattern, and no one stops. It's really just using a yielding pattern. The only people that are required to stop are the people coming into the circular part of the intersection. But if there's no oncoming vehicles, the person that's coming into the circle can just yield and then go directly in. They don't even have to stop. There is a lot of various designs and just different, one lane, two lanes, sometimes they're signals, but most of them are just yielded. There's different things where crosswalks are placed in different areas. Some have little middle landing strips in between the entering and exiting lanes. But it all depends on the area and the amount of traffic that is going through there. The whole point of a roundabout is to minimize the T-boning and head-on collisions that happen in an area. So high traffic areas, it helps people slow down, recognize pedestrian crossings, and keep traffic at a minimum and at a constant flow. It is also used to integrate tram, trains, and just any higher speed areas. So today we're going to talk about how to walk through a roundabout depending on what it looks like. So just to go with some pros versus cons, I would say that a roundabout is definitely more safe for a sighted pedestrian as opposed to a visually impaired pedestrian. The reason being, the things that we normally use as individuals to listen to traffic as a visually impaired person are not the same in a roundabout as it is for a regular intersection. But it does help that most have a splitter island, which means in between where you start your initial crosswalk. So where the crosswalk starts to where the crosswalk ends. Sometimes there is an island in the middle that you can pause or stop, separating the exit and entering traffic. So if you happen to misjudge the traffic flow or think that it's all clear to cross, you at least have a safe haven in the middle to be able to resituate. Also, there's a less chance of veering because of that splitter island. Some don't have the splitter island, but a lot do. Cars are moving at a slower rate, therefore they have a greater chance to react to you crossing the street. And they're all going in one direction, so you're able to listen to traffic coming from only one side rather than multiple ways. Some of the cons are, there's actually unfortunately a lot more cons when crossing at a roundabout than pros, but with the circulating vehicles, it can mask sounds of entering and exiting vehicles, and you can sometimes think that a car is going to be turning or exiting when they're actually still continuing to go straight, so you can confuse those two types of vehicles. Auditory information may not be adequate because of the lower speed rate. The location and direction of the crosswalk can be different from what a regular intersection is, and dependent on the roundabout, it could be placed in different areas. There is, which we'll go over later, proximal and distal crosswalks at roundabouts. When a car is going into a roundabout, they don't need to stop. So even if you are standing at the end of the crosswalk and waiting to cross, a car may not stop for you because they only have to yield and there is no stop sign. And some of them don't have a yield to pedestrian sign prior to entering the roundabout. And then the last thing being, traffic may have 2 lanes or it may have 1 lane. So dependent on the roundabout and the traffic flow, you may have 2 different lanes in the roundabout that you would have to account for rather than 1 lane. So even if you hear a car coming, it may be in the lane closest to you, or it may be in the lane furthest from you. So you gotta be aware of how many lanes are in your roundabout. Before crossing at a roundabout, a basic understanding is knowing how to cross at uncontrolled crossing. So any sort of crosswalk that isn't in an area that does not have any sort of stop sign, light, any yield to pedestrian signs, nothing. So you need to be able to be confident about crossing at those areas. So the way that we as orientation and mobility instructors talk to people about crossing at a uncontrolled intersection is situations of confidence and uncertainty. So knowing the difference between those two and knowing when to cross in those kind of situations. So a situation of confidence is using gap judgment and knowing what the timing is between approaching vehicles as opposed to the speed that they are going and where you are standing. So even if you are hearing a vehicle coming towards you, you know that you have enough time to get from point A to point B across the street. So you need to understand what the rate the vehicles are going at. So that is a situation of confidence, knowing completely that you have enough time to cross the street and enough warning time to be able to recognize when a vehicle is starting to get closer to you that you can go. A situation of uncertainty is a time where you can still cross, but you need to weigh out the pros and cons. So a situation of uncertainty is you don't have enough warning time before a vehicle is coming towards you. So sometimes if the crosswalk is right after a S curve in the street, or if it's near a hard turning area, you just need to know that. And then if there's something that's going to be blocking your view or sound masking, you need to know if it's still enough time or gives you enough feedback to be able to cross. So knowing the difference between the situations of confidence and uncertainty. When you have a situation of confidence, then you know you're completely okay to cross the street. If you are in a situation of uncertainty where you're just really not sure, you need to weigh the pros and cons of crossing and the ability to cross and what your safety, how safe it is to cross that area in uncertainty. So with that being said, let's go into the roundabouts and any questions about what a roundabout is, and then the situations of uncertainty and confidence before I move forward.
Look at me.
All right, so a roundabout, the things that you use as your sound signatures. So how we recognize when it is safe or not safe to cross is listening for those vehicles. A lot of times a roundabout is going to sound like a Y intersection. So you're going to start hearing traffic like it's going to turn, but then it straightens out. So you need to be aware that even if a car may sound like it's turning, it may end up straightening out. So being aware of the rate and the flow of traffic. When you arrive at a roundabout, at the crosswalk, it may feel like you actually have to turn at a corner. So you feel like you may be completely switching the direction of your body prior to making a cross. So you're going to come up on that crosswalk, and you, dependent on where the crosswalk lies, you may have to make between a 90-degree turn to, a 45-degree turn. It just depends on the crosswalk. The best bet is to use your ability to find that crosswalk. So using your skills that you've learned from other intersections to be able to find the crosswalk. So the number one thing is to, when you get close to a roundabout or you start hearing that flow of traffic, is to shoreline the curb. Shorelining the curb means that you are using your cane to trail along the outside. So the curb would be the closest side to the traffic flow. So if you're walking along the curb, if the street is on your left, then you're shorelining the curb to your left. If the street is on your right, then you're shorelining the curb on your right. So you're just staying as close to traffic as possible and maintaining a straight line of travel with that curb. So you can feel that dip down, or you can feel the truncated domes, or you can feel any sort of feedback that will let you know that you are now at a drop off or crosswalk. Sometimes they're not predictable. So at roundabouts, you may hit a crosswalk prior to when you think you are close to the traffic. So that's with regarding the proximal and distal crossings. We'll go back to that again. We'll go back to that, or we'll go into detail with that moving forward. But another thing that you can use to find your crosswalk is listening for the people in the flow of traffic. If there's a lot of people walking, and knowing where those people are walking and how they're turning is gonna help you find that initial curb to cross the street. Maintaining alignment on a crosswalk. You use veer reduction strategies. So we all know what happens when we veer. Using those strategies to get yourself aligned is how you're actually going to cross at a roundabout. So knowing how the curvature of the roundabout is going. So are you going against the flow of traffic? So that means you're curving to the right, or are you going with the flow of traffic, which means you're curving to the left. Yes. So knowing which way the traffic flow is going, and if you're going against or with the flow of traffic, and using those veer reduction strategies to follow that flow of traffic and how to maintain that quotation straight line of travel. The best way to maintain that straight line, again, is to use that far lane perpendicular traffic to kind of go towards. So wherever that car is entering or exiting, to hear that idling car if you're going with the flow. So if you're using a blocker car in a roundabout, is to listen for an idling car that you're going towards. So knowing that that idling car is right there and you kind of walk towards that. Another thing is to use tactual clues. So sometimes crosswalks with your cane, you can kind of feel where the white marks are on the crosswalk. So feeling that under your cane, and also using the slope of the street to feel that up curve and the down curve. Most streets do have a incline down to a decline. So the middle of the street is actually higher than both outsides of the street, which is how they keep water from building up in the middle of roads. So using that slope of the street to be able to figure out where you are in regards to your alignment. The last thing, again, is to use that island that is typically in the middle of roundabouts to be able to make sure that you are still in line. So even if you are sort of veering, you may run into the curb before you run into the initial truncated domes in the middle island. So at least you'll know you're in a safe haven in the middle of both streets exiting and entering the roundabout. Any questions yet? I know it's a lot of information. All right, so I'm just going to quickly review so far what I talked about, just to make sure that we're all on the same point in roundabouts. So first, we talked about situations of confidence and situations of uncertainty. Confidence is using your gap judgment and knowing that you have enough time to cross and enough time to recognize when approaching vehicles are going to be coming, and knowing the rate at which the vehicles are driving. Situations of uncertainty is weighing out the pros and cons and the safety, pros and cons of crossing at a certain time, and if that your pros outweigh the cons of crossing at that time. So you may not know when cars are coming, but you believe that your timing is enough to be able to cross. Typically, situations of uncertainty is not being able to hear, and it's all clear, all quiet, but the cars may be coming around a curve and you're not sure when they're going to be coming, or if there's a sound mask. knowing if there is channelized right turning lanes is really important for a roundabout, and how many lanes the roundabout has. So if there's 2 or 1, they're all in a roundabout all going the same direction, so they all should be flowing at a one-way. But knowing if there is a lane that does channelize to exit, and if there is a channelized enter lane where these people have to enter and then intersect with the middle lane. So in roundabouts, if there is 2 lanes, typically the person that enters goes into the initial right lane and then merges into the center lane until they get to where they need to exit. So if they are entering and need to exit immediately, so if they enter and then their first right turn is their exit, they normally stay in that far lane, but typically they'll merge into the center lane if they are trying to stay around the whole circle. Another thing is pros and cons. The splitter island and cars are moving at a slower speed are some pros. Some cons are the circulating vehicles can throw you off in regards to the direction they're going and if they're entering or exiting, or if they're maintaining the straight line of travel. Cars just yield. Most of them are not stopping, so they may not stop for you at the pedestrian crosswalk, and the location and the direction of the crosswalk are going to be thrown off a little bit as opposed to a regular intersection. Finding the crosswalks are not always predictable. Like I said, when you're coming up on a crosswalk, use the shoreline or curb to be able to find out where the initial crosswalk truncated domes or downslope is. Listen for the people, and it's going to feel like you are making a complete turn to get to your crosswalk. Most roundabouts sound like a Y intersection where traffic sounds like it's going to be turning, but it ends up going straight. And then maintaining alignment using that Veer reduction strategies and far lane perpendicular traffic to be able to maintain your curvature on the roundabout, including the tactual clues and slope of the street to maintain that straight line of travel. And that's in quotation, straight line. So that was just a review of what we talked about so far. All right, moving forward. So unfortunately with roundabouts, like I said before, it is a little bit more unsafe to cross at roundabouts for visually impaired pedestrians than it is for sighted pedestrians. There is very minimal literature and very minimal ADA requirements regarding roundabouts. Of course, there is like a lot do have like the yield to pedestrians. They have the truncated dome, so they are following the typical ADA guidelines, but there is no way to have those traffic signals. A lot of them don't have any traffic signals. There are very few that do, but we need to be aware that if you are crossing at a roundabout, it is going to be a lot more unsafe for you than a regular intersection, and you need to be aware of the safety concerns, and that there isn't a lot of proper safety and precautions for individuals that are crossing. So a lot of people aren't already aware of what it's like to be a blind traveler. So now you have people that are not, a lot of drivers are not even familiar on how to even drive through a roundabout. More or less they're familiarized with how to deal with a blind pedestrian. So now you have a double whammy of drivers really unsure what to do. So just being cognizant of the fact that there's going to be a lot of uncomfortable drivers going through a roundabout, because I've heard of enough people that I've talked to that even drive through roundabouts that get very anxious, very confused, and unsure on how to even do it, and they freak out. If you've ever seen or been in a vehicle with someone in a roundabout that has never driven in a roundabout, typically the initial reaction is like, how the heck do I get in here, especially with a heavy flow of traffic. And there's a lot of people out there that will do anything to avoid those roundabouts. So just know that there is not a lot of information regarding roundabouts. So there are different types of crosswalks and different types of ways that people have made crosswalks a little bit more safe for individuals, but there are pros and cons to all those different ways to cross at a roundabout, or the crossings that they have created for roundabouts. So like I said before, the proximal and distal crossings. So the proximal crossing we have at a closer to the actual roundabout. It is actually a straight crossing from point A to point B, but you are a little bit, just a couple feet back from where the actual roundabout is. So you are missing a lot of audible sounds when we are at the proximal crossing. So we're close enough to hear the flow of traffic, but not close enough to understand if a car is going to be yielding. A lot of cars at a proximal crossing are going to ignore the fact that there's a crosswalk right there, then are going to be entering the roundabout, that they just kind of cross over the crosswalk and go right as close as they possibly can get to the roundabout, the same way that any sort of or channelized right turn lanes do as well. So they're just going to skip over the crosswalk. So being aware of the cars that are coming towards you, are aware that there is a crosswalk, and you're aware that there is a car coming that you need to be aware of. If you are going clockwise, knowing that the car is going to be entering the intersection. If you're going counterclockwise, you know that the car is exiting the intersection. So the car that is exiting is going to be a little less careful than the car that's entering. So knowing that if you are going counterclockwise, that car, when it's exiting the roundabout, is going to be probably going at a quicker speed than the car that is entering the roundabout. So sometimes I recommend that going clockwise around a roundabout is safer than going counterclockwise. But you are going to be missing some of those audible signals when at a proximal crossing. Some of the pros to a proximal crossing is it is straight. So you are going to be able to maintain that straight line of travel a little bit better than a crosswalk that is right along the curve of the roundabout. So now we're going to move on to a distal crossing. So a distal crossing is at a further distance away from the roundabout. So you are going to be pretty far away from any sort of roundabout and any of the safety precautions that are at a roundabout, so you don't have to worry about them. So a lot of the things that you only have to listen for is just crossing at a uncontrolled intersection. So just knowing that there's going to be cars coming one way from your left and one way from your right. Typically at roundabouts, there's only 2 lanes of traffic, one going upstream and one going downstream. So you know that you're only going to have to really worry about 2 lanes of traffic. And if you don't hear any cars, you know it's a safe time to cross. So distal crossings are actually probably one of the most safe ways to cross at a roundabout, and those are the best crosswalks that they have. The only problem with a distal crossing is cars have not yet slowed down, and the cars that are exiting, so the cars that are entering, that are about to enter the roundabout, are still at a pretty high rate of speed, dependent on what the speed limit is in the area. And then the cars that are exiting the roundabout could just be picking up speed, so they're not prepared to slow down again when they hit that crosswalk. Now, most areas are supposed to have a pedestrian sign right near the roundabout, but if you live in a rural small area, chances are that they don't have those signs that they're supposed to at those roundabouts. The next one is it's proximal distal. So it's a zigzag crossing. So what happens is you cross upstream and then you end up going all the way down the road, and then you cross downstream. So you end up going in this Z pattern rather than going straight across. A lot of people end up preferring this as a visually impaired traveler. This is one way to eliminate any sort of safety concerns regarding the entering and exiting of cars. And then it also it gives people a little break in between both of the oncoming and going traffic. So you're aware that you get a break in between and you get to walk down the island. It is if you are trying to go one direction over the other, it does kind of make you go out of the way rather than on the way. But it is said to be the safest way to cross at a roundabout is those zigzag street crossings. So they do make them exactly like that, where you enter one way, you go down on the splitter island, and then you cross again on the other side down a little ways. Some roundabouts do have lighted intersections. So a car is required to stop or has a constant yellow signal, or they do have pedestrian signs. Very limited, but some do, where you can press a button prior to crossing. There is not a lot of them, very rare, but they are out there. The reason that they don't do that is because of how expensive it is to add lights and crosswalk signals for people to cross at those areas. So they typically don't end up doing any sort of crosswalk or lights, crosswalk signals or lights to stop people from continuing to drive through into a roundabout, because they believe that a roundabout is safer for regular driving vehicles in general, which typically, as a driver, roundabouts do eliminate a lot of issues regarding speeding, accidents, or head-on accidents or T-bones that happen quite often in accidents that are more fatal than not. So a lot of accidents that do happen in roundabouts are safer, and they're typically not as bad as the ones that would be otherwise at intersections. So the lights that they do have, they try to keep to a minimum, but there are some crosswalks that do have lights, and sometimes those lights aren't at the crosswalk too. The crosswalks are still a little bit further back. Now, to finish off with some crosswalks that are at roundabouts, some roundabouts don't have crosswalks at all. So you're just, free walking along the curb around the arc. So you're just using your cane to shoreline all the way around the roundabout. Those are not the fun roundabouts, and typically those are in very rural areas where there's not a lot of traffic, not a lot of people, and you're basically already knowledgeable on how to walk along a curb or like a grass line rather than walking on a sidewalk. So you should already be familiarized with how to travel along a roadway that doesn't have a sidewalk. So there are some roundabouts that they just have a small white zone coming out of the curb where you can just walk along, and you have to be careful, and you better be booking it around that roundabout so you get to where you need to be. But again, crossing, if there is no crosswalk or any sort of sidewalk along that roundabout, I recommend that you go against the flow of traffic. So wherever the cars are coming, you go towards them, so they look you right in the face. They see you coming to them, and you can sense a vehicle coming towards you rather than hitting you in the back. If you do have some sight, you can at least see if a vehicle's coming and you need to leap out of the way, or use your senses to hear that vehicle getting too close to you. I know it sounds really scary, but that is the unfortunate part of being a blind traveler, is having those safety concerns always in the back of your mind. So to review what we just talked about regarding crosswalks. So we have the proximal and distal crossing, the zigzag crossing, lighted crossings, and then the uncontrolled, non-crosswalk, non-sidewalk crossing. So proximal is closer to the roundabout, but still far enough away where we're making a straight crossing over the two lanes of traffic. We have the distal, which is far enough away from the roundabout where we don't have to worry about roundabout traffic, but we do have to worry about the ongoing and the oncoming traffic going both directions. The zigzag, we only have to worry about one at a time because we're able to cross one lane walk upstream or downstream and then cross the other lane. So that gives us a little bit more time to focus on two different lanes of traffic depending on when we're crossing. With all these crossings, if there is a splitter island, we are able to only, again, worry about one lane of crossing rather than two, and only having to worry about one car at a time. Then the lighted ones aren't necessarily safer, but there are some lighted roundabout crossings. The downside of that is the maintenance and cost of the lighted intersections at roundabouts, so they are very slim to none. And then again, the roundabout going along a curb's edge in a small white zone that you would just kind of follow along going with against the flow of traffic. If there is a sidewalk or a crosswalk, so a sidewalk with a crosswalk, I recommend going clockwise. Again, still going against the flow of traffic, just because it will give you a greater feedback than going with the flow of traffic. So even if there is a crosswalk and a sidewalk, you can go either way, but it's recommended to go against the flow of traffic. If there is no sidewalk or crosswalk, definitely go against the flow of traffic. So it gives people more reaction time to see you coming towards them and see your cane first before they see you. Because that white cane will give them a little bit more of a heads up that they're on their way. Any questions before I kind of review everything I talked about? All right, doesn't look like it. Okay, so again, roundabouts, circular or a circular pattern of traffic going one direction around a center circle, also called a traffic circle. It is safer for most pedestrians, but not safer for visually impaired pedestrians. It can get a little bit more complicated. Pros are they do have splitter islands, so you only need to worry about one lane of traffic at a time. They exit and enter traffic. Only one. You only have to worry about exit, and then you only have to worry about enter if there is a splitter island. Cars are moving at a slower speed, therefore they're able to recognize that you are there. Some cons are the circulating vehicles can mask the sounds of entering and exiting traffic. So sometimes you can recognize a car as exiting, or you can recognize a car as going straight, and they might end up doing the exact opposite. Sometimes the car may be there's two lanes, sorry. The car may have two lanes rather than one, so you may hear a car in the far lane, but there's still a car coming in the close lane, so you may think it's time to cross, but it really isn't. So it's hard to use traffic to maintain or set up alignment sometimes, and the location and the direction of the crosswalk is also important. Regarding the location and the direction of the crosswalk, we go back to the proximal, distal, zigzag, lighted, and uncontrolled. No crosswalk, no sidewalk crossings. There is slim literature and very non-proper safety rules regarding a roundabout. There's not a lot of precautions or literature regarding how to instruct drivers to deal with roundabouts, and there is little literature to explain to drivers about blind pedestrians, so we're putting them both into one thing, and drivers can get really uncomfortable, so that's what makes it very unsafe for a blind traveler to be walking along a roundabout. They are still okay to walk around. I'm not trying to scare you away from that, but it is something to be aware of. Knowing that there is situations of confidence and situations of uncertainty. Situations of confidence is being able to use gap judgment and vehicle speed to be able to know that it is a safe time to cross and that you have plenty of time by the way of listening to how far the vehicles are away. And there is enough space and time distance to be able to tell that an approaching vehicle is at a reliable distance for you to cross. Situations of uncertainty is if there is not enough warning, or there is a sound mass that makes it unable for you to recognize when a vehicle is coming towards you. So using that as your best judgment and weighing out the pros and cons of safety to be able to cross. So then you have your sound signatures, which is something that we use for situations of confidence and situations of uncertainty. So with roundabouts, sometimes you can feel like you're at a Y intersection where traffic is turning towards you, but then ends up straightening out. So being aware of that noise difference with a roundabout. And then sometimes it can feel like you're coming up on the roundabout and then suddenly you make a hard turn. So know that that can happen as well. And so you may be facing a totally different traffic pattern by the time you hit the curb. To find the crosswalk, using the shoreline with your cane closest to the parallel running traffic, and then listening for people, and then finding the downward curve for the curb and the truncated domes at the crosswalk. To maintain alignment, we use Veer reduction strategies, far lane perpendicular traffic, so to help us stay around that curve, using tactual clues and the upslope and the downslope of the street while we're crossing that roadway. Any questions or concerns, any experience on roundabouts as a blind traveler that you've had that have caused issues or that you've safely done, or any positive feedback that you have had on roundabouts? No. All righty. Well, then that concludes my spiel for the day.